Hey, what's up, guys? It's me, ThePsychNPDavidC. So most people think a psych hospital is like something out of a horror movie. They think there's like people in straitjackets, there's people strapped down to beds, there's like patients locked up in their cell, and whenever someone walks by, they go up to their window and they're like, ah! And then there's nurses walking around with glasses on and a little clipboard taking notes on every patient. That image of a psych hospital is actually a pretty big exaggeration on what actually happens. As a psych nurse practitioner who's worked in inpatient hospitals, I'm going to walk you through what it's actually like if you or one of your loved ones were to be admitted. I'm going to break it down step by step from a patient perspective, so you'll know what to expect if you ever happen to go to one. Let's talk about it. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that this is based on my own personal experiences at hospitals, so it may be different at other hospitals. So first things first, let's discuss how someone ends up at a psych hospital in the first place. So in order to be admitted to a psych hospital, you have to meet one of three criteria, with the first being danger to self, the second being danger to others, and the third being gravely disabled. You only have to meet one of those three criteria, but there are people who meet multiple criteria at the same time. We get a lot of patients from other ERs. Maybe like someone overdosed on sleeping pills and then they ended up in the ER. The ER will medically stabilize them and then send them to the psych hospital. We also did police drop-offs. For example, if someone's being violent in the streets and someone calls 911 on them, they would bring them to the psych hospital. And also people can just walk in the lobby and try to admit themselves. Usually that's for people who know they need help. Now, when someone meets one of those three criteria, they can either come on an involuntary hold or they can come on voluntary status. So the involuntary hold would be a 72-hour hold, which means they can keep you in the psych hospital for up to 72 hours. But the thing is that your assigned psychiatrist may feel like you need more time there, so they can actually extend the hold at the end of the 72 hours. And as far as coming in on voluntary status, that means you came on your own free will and they have you sign like a voluntary form. But what I'm about to say next is very important. Just because you came in of your own free will on voluntary status doesn't mean you get to leave anytime you want. If you're on voluntary status and you enter the hospital and then you decide that you want to leave, you actually have to request to go AMA or against medical advice. So what happens is a licensed evaluator comes and meets with you, and if they feel like you're a danger to yourself, a danger to others, or gravely disabled, they can actually keep you there. They can actually place you on a 72-hour hold even though you were on voluntary status in the first place. This is a very big misconception that patients have when it comes to voluntary status. They think that means you can just leave whenever you want to, but that's actually not the case. On average, patients stay there for about 3 to 7 days, but it could end up being shorter or longer just based on your symptoms. So once you arrive at the hospital, you're going to have security or nurses escort you to the unit. And then once you arrive on the unit, there's going to be staff who search through your belongings for safety. They document everything you bring in, so they give everything back to you when you get discharged. There are certain things that aren't allowed on the units. At my hospital, you can't have things like cell phones, obviously weapons, drugs, any strings, anything that's potentially dangerous. So after they log in all your stuff, they're going to do what's called a skin check. A nurse and another staff will walk you into a private room, and the nurse will inspect your skin for any scars, bruises, wounds, or anything like that. And yes, unfortunately, this does include your private areas. It's definitely an awkward part of the process, not just for you, but for the nurse as well. But it's just part of the process for safety reasons. The nurse has to document what's on your skin so they know what was there before you were admitted. For example, let's say a patient came in with no scars or anything on their body at all, and then one day in the hospital they end up with a cut on their forearm. By checking the skin check, we would know that the patient was able to cut their forearm somehow while in the hospital. After they inspect your skin, they're probably going to make you squat and cough as well. The purpose for this is there's actually patients who will try to hide things up their butt. I've seen patients hide things such as weed, weapons, vapes, or even drugs inside their butt. So if a nurse doesn't do a thorough skin check, the patient can actually just squeeze those items out of their butt later, which would compromise the safety of not only the patients, but the staff as well. And then after the skin check, you're either changed into hospital gowns, or sometimes they let you wear your own clothing, as long as there's nothing such as strings attached to them. We give the patient the option of having us cut out the strings, so we often end up with patients wearing pants without drawstrings and shoes without shoelaces. And then after that, a nurse is gonna do your initial evaluation. They're gonna do things like take your vital signs, ask you why you're here, explain to you what type of hold you're on, inform you who your assigned psychiatrist is, ask you about your medical history, your psychiatric history, if you're currently taking any medications, if you do any drugs or alcohol or smoke nicotine. They're not going to report you if you say you do drugs. They ask because there are protocols in place in case you experience withdrawal symptoms. Then they'll ask you some more questions like, do you have any thoughts of hurting yourself right now? Do you have any thoughts of hurting others right now? and then they should show you around the unit. There can be many different types of units. At my hospital, we have one unit for high-functioning patients, which means those patients are not aggressive, they're calm, cooperative. For the most part, they're probably just depressed. And then there's other units for more acute patients. These are the kinds of patients that they depict in movies and TV shows. They're more likely to be aggressive and are often yelling or screaming. Every room is a shared room. You're probably going to have either 1 or 2 roommates, and there's shared bathrooms too, so hopefully your roommates clean up after themselves. If not, then there's housekeepers who do their rounds every hour or so. The furniture in the rooms are very basic. It's just a bed, a countertop, and a little cubby for you to put your things. There's no curtains or anything like that because everything is designed to be as safe as possible. There's usually a dining room where you eat with other patients, and then there's a group room where you do group activities or therapy, and sometimes there's a patio if you want to go outside. Each unit has their own set routine for the day. So on the unit that I work at, you'd wake up, staff would take your vital signs, then you'd go to the dining room with all the other patients to eat breakfast, and then there's going to be nurses handing out morning medications if you have any scheduled. There's also group therapy sessions that run throughout the day. In the evening time, there's a little bit of free time where you can just like hang out and chill in the group room with the other patients. There's also scheduled visiting hours, and then they usually shut everything down around 10 p.m. That's when all the patients are expected to go back to their rooms and sleep for the night. Honestly, it can feel boring most of the time that you're there, but these hospitals are designed for safety first. Now let's go over the different types of staff that you'll meet. First up is what we call mental health workers. They're basically the staff that are on the floor at all times. They're the ones that check up on you every 15 minutes, and I mean every 15 minutes. Even at nighttime when you're sleeping, they might shine a flashlight in your face just to make sure you're breathing. They're also the ones that check your vital signs, and they're the ones you relay your questions or concerns to if you want to talk to the nurse. And then there's the nurses who handle admissions, discharges, medications, phone calls. You'll see them a little less often than you see the mental health workers because they have to attend to the nursing station and the medication room. There's always going to be at least one nurse on the unit, and nurses can call the psychiatrist if anything arises. And that brings us to psychiatrists or nurse practitioners. From this point on, I'm just going to use the term provider, which can refer to either a psychiatrist or a nurse practitioner. So at my hospital, it isn't required for there to be a provider on site. Providers are only expected to see their patients once per day. That means you really need to have any questions or concerns ready for them when they show up, because once they leave, they're not coming back until the next day most likely. The amount of time a provider spends with their patients will vary. Some providers will have lengthy discussions with their patients regarding the treatment plan, while other providers will literally spend like 30 seconds with their patients. For example, there's a provider at my hospital who just comes in as like, "Hey, I'm Dr. So-and-so. Any issues with your medications? No? Okay, see you tomorrow." And then he leaves. Regardless, providers are the ones who make any changes to your medications, and they decide when you're able to be discharged. You'll also meet a social worker who will discuss your discharge plans and your aftercare plans. They'll give you referrals and resources for when you leave the hospital. Because once you're discharged, you're no longer under the care of that provider. So you would have to find an outpatient provider if you want to continue taking your medications. Now let's address the crazy myths that you see in TV shows and movies. Regarding straitjackets, I've never seen a patient in a straitjacket. Ever. Regarding the idea of patients being locked in their rooms and like looking outside their window into the hallway and like banging on the door, that only happens sometimes. When a patient gets too agitated, we can actually escort them to the seclusion room, which is a private room for them to stay in while being supervised by a staff member. If while in the seclusion room, the patient becomes too violent, we can actually lock the seclusion room. And that's when the patient wants to leave the room, but they're not safe to do so, that's when they could start looking out the window and banging on the door. And regarding patients being strapped down to beds, that's also pretty rare. Continuing from the previous example, if a patient keeps banging on the door like that, they could actually end up hurting themselves. So if they're unwilling to stop, we can actually go in there and strap them down to the bed. That's what we call restraints. They'll be strapped down on each wrist, each ankle, and their chest as well. We only use restraints as a last resort. So that means we've tried everything else first. We tried talking to the patient, we tried offering medications to help them calm down. Sometimes we give them emergency injections and they're still agitated. That's when we're forced to use restraints. And as for the nurse walking around with a clipboard in their hand, that's actually pretty accurate. But in most cases, it's gonna be a mental health worker walking around with a clipboard, because they have to do their rounds every 15 minutes to make sure every patient is safe. And then regarding the idea of having a unit with multiple patients just yelling and screaming all the time, that's not very accurate either. Because if we have one patient who's screaming and disrupting the unit, We have to de-escalate that patient ASAP, or else it's going to start a chain reaction. If one patient is yelling and screaming, then it's going to lead to other patients wanting to yell and scream too, so we have to put out the fire before it spreads. Keep in mind, all this yelling and screaming and restraints and stuff is more likely to occur on the acute units. The high-functioning units are usually calm and quiet, so psych hospitals aren't actually as scary as movies and TV shows make them out to be. Yes, some of these scary things can happen, but it's actually pretty rare. Hopefully this video gave you a better understanding of what a psych hospital is actually like. If you have any other questions regarding psych hospitals, let me know in the comments down below. If you found this video helpful, make sure to like and subscribe. I am also on TikTok and Instagram if you want to follow me over there at ThePsychNPDavidC. I do telehealth medication management for adults living in California. If you're interested, there's links down below. And with that, your mental health just leveled up. You're welcome.